I am back with another Prove It Basic Strategy video for you guys today. This is a series where I play out a certain hand 100 different times the way Basic Strategy says, and then another 100 times the way a ploppy or non-card counter might play. And today we're talking about an 11 versus a dealer's ace. So I have some hearts here to help us with this. We have a 2 and a 9 to make our 11. And then the dealer, of course, has their ace. All the other cards, when we hit and double, will be out of a 6-deck shoe. I have green and red chips set up for the two different decisions where there's 40 chips in each of those piles. At the end, we're gonna see which one of those piles, whether it's the card counter or the ploppy, is gonna have more at the end. I have never done this one. I thought I had, but it's probably a more interesting hand compared to some of the others. But because this one has a deviation that's really close to 0, in fact, depending if it's even an S17 game or an H17 game, the decision is different in this one. We're playing H17 as that's kind of more common in the United States. That's where I'm from, and as opposed to S17. And so therefore, the correct decision is to double down. Now there are deviations, like I said, there's a deviation if the count drops below a true -1 or a true -1 or lower, then you should just hit. And same thing in S17 games, it is a hit, but if it jumps up high enough, then it becomes a double down. So it's kind of a real iffy one as to which way this will go. So my prediction is that this is going to be very close at the end with our chip count as to which pile is going to be winning at the end. So with all that said, I'm going to play out the first 5 hands with you, and each time, of course, the dealer's going to need a whole card. All right, oops, by the way, let's do this. Let me throw this back in just so that you know these are shuffled up. If I mess up the first few cards here, there we go, some shuffles and strips, and put it back in, then that's going to mess up everything else behind it. There's no way for me to plan what is happening if I do that, okay? So let's try this. Now I can give the dealer their whole card, and let's say that this guy is going to be our double down. So I'm just going to start them off like that every single time. One thing I do have to be a little careful with, though, is if the dealer has blackjack, which could very well happen, they would never get the chance to double down, all right, where they would just lose 1 chip in that case. As you know, if the dealer has blackjack, they would just take that right away and you don't get that chance to double down. So that's one kind of caveat to this one, or whenever the dealer has an ace compared to when they don't. Over here, this guy's going to be just our hitter, and in order to do it the right way, this one, so this one's going to double. Let's put it like this, so there would have 13, but over here for the hits, I'm just going to kind of slide them over, and now it's still 13, which is still a hit. Right, and then 19, okay? Dealer, in this case, has 14 and also 19. So because of that, this one's actually a push, whereas this guy lost 2 chips, okay? So I'm gonna say that my basic strategy guy lost. I'm gonna do this in tally marks. I have notebook paper this time to help me stay a little more organized. And this guy was a winner. Or I'm sorry, this one was a push, my bad. And so that's gonna get 1 tally mark there. Okay, I'm going to take all the cards back except for those hearts. And we're going to reset and try it again. Oh, so like this time, they do have blackjack, so I shouldn't put this out there yet because they would not get a chance to play it. They would just lose both right away. So for this one, I'm going to mark down a loss for both basic strategy and the ploppy. Okay, put that card back. Try it again. No blackjack this time, so now they are going to double down. Okay, and now they have 16. Okay, over here, 16 versus the dealer's ace. This is still a hit, and that's too many. It's 22, so they were going to lose 1. Dealer has 16, 16, and 21, so this guy also lost. All right, so if that was back this way, it would be like that still, and that would still be a loser. So again, both are losses, I should say, for the third hand there. Okay, put these back. Let's do 2 more, and then I'll throw it into a hyper-lapse for the other 95, so don't waste your whole day. So let's get these going. No blackjack this time, so it is going to double. And now we have 14. Over here, 14 is still a hit. And that is too many, 23, so that's a loss. Dealer, put it back and think of it this way. Dealer has 17, excuse me, and they're playing H17 games, so I do have to hit. And 17, so again, another loss there. Not going too well for this guy. So those are both losses, loss, and loss. Now, I know some of you are yelling at me right now in the comments because I used this card for this one, but then I didn't for the dealer's hand, where, you know, it might have made a little bit of a difference in that case. However, because sometimes I would use it for this guy's hand if they didn't bust, and other times I would use it for the dealer's hand, that's a lot to keep track of, and because of that, I don't think I'm going to do that for this particular challenge. If you have a better way of me doing that, you can let me know, but I think that would just be a little bit too hard to kind of keep track of when, especially if, you know, this was a hand that was maybe this was an 8 or something, right? And so that'd be 19. Well, I can't just use this card all the time for theirs. I'd have to go back in for the next round, and then it gets real messy. So I just don't think there's a really good way to do it. This is how I'm doing it. You probably don't like it. You can let me know that down below. Maybe you have a better idea. All right, that's only 4. I got one more here before our hyper-lapse. No blackjack, so we are going to double. See if we can get this guy a win. Goodness. And so that was 14, still a hit, and 19. Dealer has 13, 16. That is 12 and 17. So this one is a win, whereas over here with this guy, this was a loss on the 14. So we have a winner for our ploppy and 5 losses in a row for our basic strategy. Not going too well there, but again, that's just a quick 5-hand sample. We're going to throw it into a hyperlapse now and do the other 95 and see if basic strategy does actually prove to be the best decision or not. Now, 100 hands is probably not a big enough sample, so again, you might be yelling at me in the comments for that, but every single video in this series I've said that's not enough. This series is more for the doubters who do not believe basic strategy. All right, with that said, let's throw it into a hyperlapse, and I'll be right back with you at the end to see the results. All right, guys, I'm back with the results, and they were really interesting. We'll get to them here in a second. All right, however, one thing that I want to talk about first, these are the cards that we used, of course. Let me stack those up for us. We'll get to the chip count also here in a little bit. But when there was let me see if I can cherry pick a card here. There was a 10 valued card. This was by far the difference maker. And there's, of course, 4 out of 13 cards in a suit that are 10s, so that's 30.7%. It's the most likely of all the cards to be pulled. However, it's not always going to be pulled. You can't assume that there's a 10 underneath. But when there was, this is what happened. So I mentioned at the beginning, you know, we were doubling down on this guy and just hitting on the other one, which is not basic strategy. But when there was a 10 underneath, you didn't have that opportunity to double yet. All right. If you think about how a game would work, right? These are your cards that you get dealt. The dealer checks for blackjack. Oh, they have it. You don't have a chance to put out that other bet yet. Because of that, you only lose 1 bet, but so do they. All right, so that was a big difference maker in a lot of these loss situations right? There was 55 losses for the basic strategy guy and only 53 for the ploppy, or the non-basic strategy guy. But in either case, they each lost one chip, right, or one bet, whatever they were betting at that point. Similarly, when they got a 10, right, that's really good for the player as well, because of course that's 21. I don't think there was any pushes, and obviously you can't lose when you have 21 here for this guy. But remember, at this point they had doubled down, right? They have to double in order to get that other card, and I'm using the same cards over here as well. So even though it's the same amount of wins, right, that's why these were really close to each other, 39 and 37 for the wins. This guy's winning twice as many chips as this one, right? He gets 2 more, this guy only wins 1, and so therefore his chip count is a lot more at the end of this. So kind of an interesting result there. All right, that said, let's look at the actual numbers. I've mentioned a few already. So the wins, there was 2 more wins for the double down guy, and I think those 2 basically came when, you know, they would get something like, let's say 11, and they pulled an ace, right? Well, that's 12. This guy's gonna keep hitting on his 12 versus the dealer's ace, and if they pull something like a 10 now, well, you lose this one. Whereas this guy, you know, if the dealer pulls to a bust, well, he's gonna win that. And so that's kind of where that discrepancy came from. There was a couple times where it worked that way as opposed to the other way more often, and so there was 2 more wins for our basic strategy guy. However, they also lost more, the basic strategy guy, because of the same reason there, right? If there's 12, right, you have 11, you just hit, you have 12, you can hit again, maybe you get like an 8 or something, you get 20. Well, if the dealer doesn't bust, but has more than this guy, you know, this guy might win, whereas this person, the double guy might have lost. So there was kind of that reason. All right, and then similar reasons for the pushes. There's just more opportunities to push because the dealer has to be in that range between 17 and 21. Well, if you double down too low, whereas this guy would keep hitting, you're gonna push more often as opposed to someone who has to, you know, just take one card and you're below that amount of where the dealer has to stand. So kind of all the numbers I think make sense. And additionally, because of that, and especially the win rate here, the chip count also makes sense. So let's take a look at that. Now, if you want to run your own simulations like this, I've partnered with Casino Supply to give you 10% off everything on their site using code A1BJ. They've got high quality blackjack shoes, discard trays, playing cards, custom felts like the one I use, chip sets including their popular Monte Carlo chips and Imperial chips. And this isn't just a one-time discount. You can keep using the code A1BJ again and again to get 10% off your entire order. If you're just getting started, I recommend picking up something that every serious blackjack player should own, a 6-deck discard tray. Then if you like the quality, you can always come back later for chips, cards, or a full setup. Again, use code A1BJ at checkout at casinosupply.com. All right, these are in groups of 10 here for these ones. All right, so this guy, our ploppy, our non-card counter, if this was an H17 game, which you're supposed to double down on your 11 versus dealer's ace, they went from 40 chips down to 24, so they lost 16 chips. Whereas this guy, when they doubled, they went from 40 down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, down to 37. So they only lost 3. All right. Now, again, this is not a big enough sample size. When we double, typically that's because we have the advantage. All right. And because of that, you know, normally they would be a positive situation. You'd have more than 40 chips here. And so that's another reason why hitting is just so bad. But again, this is too small of a sample size of just 100 hands. Whereas if this was maybe 1,000 or 10,000 or obviously millions, I'd probably want to see this, you know, creep more towards that 101, 105% return compared to maybe just a slight loss like we saw today. So just probably not a big enough sample size, because again, when basic strategy tells you to double down, oftentimes that is when you have an advantage over the dealer, and you can kind of see that. All right, so kind of an interesting one. I'm always looking to see which hands you want to see played out more. And so if you have a specific hand like an 11 versus dealer's ace or whatever you happen to see next. Otherwise, I do have a full playlist that you can check out right here of other hands that I've played out 100 times. And until next time, remember, this is A1 Blackjack.